The woman's body lay crumpled in the snow like a discarded doll, her blue lips trembling with words that made no sound. And when Garrett Brennan dismounted his horse that bitter February morning in 1883, he thought he was looking at a corpse until her eyes flickered open and seized his heart with their desperate plea for life. He dropped to his knees beside her, his thick leather gloves already coming off so he could touch her face, feel for the warmth that would tell him whether saving her was possible or whether he was already too late. Her skin felt like ice beneath his calloused fingers, but there was still heat somewhere deep inside, still a pulse fluttering weakly at her throat. Snow had drifted around her body during the night, half burying her in white, and her dark hair spread across the frozen ground like spilled ink. "Can you hear me?" Garrett's voice came out rough, cracked from the cold and from riding alone for too many days. "Can you move?" Her lips formed words, but no sound emerged. Her eyes, a startling green even dulled by near death, fixed on his face with an intensity that made something shift in his chest. She was young, maybe 23 or 24, and even half frozen and clearly abandoned. There was something about her that made him think of strength rather than fragility. He did not hesitate. Garrett gathered her into his arms, surprised by how light she felt, how her body curled instinctively toward his warmth even though she seemed barely conscious. Her dress was thin, completely inadequate for the New Mexico winter that had swept down from the mountains, and he could see no coat, no blanket, nothing that suggested anyone had cared whether she lived or died out here. His horse, a sturdy roan mare named Copper, stood patient as he lifted the woman into the saddle and then swung up behind her, cradling her against his chest. The nearest town was Roswell, still 8 miles south, but his small ranch lay just 3 miles west, tucked into a valley where he had built a life of solitude after the war had taken everything else from him. "Stay with me," he murmured against her frozen hair as he urged Copper into a careful trot. "Just stay with me a little longer." The ride felt eternal. Garrett kept one arm locked around the woman's waist while his other hand held the reins, and he talked to her the whole way, nonsense mostly, anything to keep her tethered to consciousness. He told her about Copper, about the cabin he had built with his own hands, about the beef stew he had simmering that would warm her from the inside out. He did not know if she heard him, but her eyes stayed open, fixed on the horizon, and that had to mean something. When his cabin finally came into view, smoke still rising from the chimney where he had banked the fire before leaving that morning, relief flooded through him so powerfully his hands shook. He dismounted in front of the door, pulling her down with him, and kicked the door open with more force than necessary. The cabin's warmth hit them like a wall. Garrett carried her straight to his bed, the only bed, and laid her down on the thick quilts his mother had made before she died. The woman's eyes had closed during the last mile, and panic seized him until he pressed his fingers to her throat and felt that fragile pulse still beating. He worked quickly, efficiently, drawing on half-forgotten knowledge from field hospitals and desperate nights during the war. Her wet dress had to come off, had to be replaced with dry warmth, and he tried not to look too closely as he stripped away the sodden fabric and wrapped her in every blanket he owned. Her feet were the worst, pale and bloodless, and he spent long minutes rubbing them between his palms, trying to force circulation back into the frozen flesh. When he had done everything he could think of, Garrett pulled a chair close to the bed and sat, watching her breathe. The cabin filled with the sounds of the fire crackling and the wind howling outside, and he found himself praying for the first time in years, formless, desperate words that asked for her life to be spared. Hours passed. He fed the fire, checked her pulse, held warm broth to her lips even though she could not swallow. The day faded into evening, and still she lay silent and pale, hovering in that terrible space between life and death. It was full dark when her eyes finally opened, truly opened with awareness behind them. Garrett had been dozing in his chair, and her small sound, barely more than a breath, brought him instantly alert. "You are safe," he said, leaning forward so she could see his face. "You are in my cabin. I found you in the snow." Her lips moved, and this time sound came out hoarse and cracked. "He left me." The words hit Garrett like a punch. "Who left you, my husband?" Her voice broke on the word. "Victor. He left me to die." Rage, hot and sudden, surged through Garrett's chest. What kind of man left a woman in the snow to freeze? What kind of monster abandoned his wife to the elements? "He is gone now," Garrett said, forcing his voice to stay calm and steady. "You do not have to think about him. Just rest." But she was struggling to sit up, panic flooding her features. "No, you do not understand. He will come back. He will find me." Garrett gently pressed her shoulders back against the pillows. "If he comes here, he will have to go through me first, and I promise you that will not be easy for him." Something in his tone must have convinced her, because she stopped fighting and sank back down. Tears leaked from the corners of her eyes, tracking down her temples into her hair. "I do not even know your name," she whispered. "Garrett Brennan. And you are Hannah Harper." She swallowed hard. "I was Hannah Harper before I married. I suppose I am Hannah Sutton now, though I wish to God I was not." The name felt right in Garrett's mind, fitting her somehow even though he had known her less than a day. Hannah Harper. Hannah Sutton. Neither name seemed to quite capture the woman lying in his bed, bruised and broken but somehow still whole in the places that mattered. "Well, Hannah," he said quietly, "you are welcome to stay here as long as you need. No one is going to hurt you while you are under my roof." She studied his face for a long moment, and Garrett wondered what she saw there. He knew he was not much to look at, weathered and scarred from 30 years of hard living, his dark hair already showing silver at the temples even though he had only just turned 29. But whatever Hannah saw must have satisfied her, because she nodded slowly and let her eyes drift closed again. "Thank you," she breathed, and then sleep claimed her, real sleep this time rather than unconsciousness. Garrett sat watching her until he was sure she rested easy, and then he rose and went to tend to Copper, who had been waiting patiently in the cold. He brushed the horse down, fed her, and stood for a long time in the barn, letting the cold air clear his head. He had not planned on this. Had not planned on finding a woman in the snow. Had not planned on the way his heart had seized when he first saw her lying there. Had not planned on the fierce protectiveness that had roared to life inside him the moment she said someone had left her to die. Garrett had been alone for 5 years, ever since he came back from the war and found his fiancée had married someone else, and he had told himself he preferred it that way. But standing in his barn with the wind howling outside, he could not deny the truth. The cabin had felt more like a home in the past few hours, with Hannah sleeping in his bed, than it had in all the years he had lived there alone. When he went back inside, she was still sleeping, her breathing deep and even. Garrett made himself a bedroll by the fire and lay down, but sleep did not come easy. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her face as it had been when he found her, pale and desperate, lips blue with cold. He saw the absolute betrayal in her eyes when she said her husband had left her. What had driven a man to such an act? What had Hannah done, or not done, that had made someone decide she deserved to die in the snow? The questions chased themselves through his mind until exhaustion finally dragged him under. He woke to the smell of coffee and sat up so fast his vision swam. Hannah was standing at his stove, wrapped in one of his shirts that hung nearly to her knees, stirring something in a pot. She turned when she heard him move and offered a tentative smile. "I hope you do not mind," she said. I found the coffee and some cornmeal. I thought you might be hungry." Garrett rose slowly, aware that he must look like something the cat dragged in. "You should be resting. You nearly died yesterday." "I feel better." She poured coffee into 2 tin cups and brought one to him. "Weak but better, and I wanted to thank you properly. You saved my life." He took the coffee, their fingers brushing for just a moment, and heat that had nothing to do with the hot liquid shot through him. "Anyone would have done the same." "No." Hannah's voice went hard. "They would not have. I know that now." They sat at his small table, eating cornmeal mush that she had somehow made palatable, and Garrett found himself studying her in the morning light. Her hair was a rich brown with hints of auburn, curling slightly where it had dried. Her face was heart-shaped, with high cheekbones and a determined chin. But it was her eyes that caught and held him, that startling green that seemed to see straight through to his soul. "Will you tell me what happened?" he asked gently. "You do not have to, but sometimes talking helps." Hannah was quiet for so long he thought she would refuse. Then she set down her spoon and folded her hands in her lap. "I married Victor Sutton 6 months ago in Santa Fe," she began, her voice steady but distant. "My father had died the year before, and I had no family left, no money. Victor seemed kind at first. He had a freight business, he said, traveling between towns. He promised me security, a home." She paused, staring into her coffee. "The kindness disappeared the moment we were married. He was cruel, Garrett, not just in words but in actions. He drank, and when he drank, he became someone else entirely, someone frightening." Garrett's jaw clenched, but he said nothing, letting her continue. "2 days ago, he said we were traveling to Roswell. He had business there, he claimed. But when we were 20 miles out, in the middle of nowhere, he stopped the wagon. He pulled me down into the snow and told me he was tired of having a wife, that I was a burden he no longer wanted to carry." Her voice cracked. "He said he was doing me a mercy, that freezing was an easy death. And then he just left. He drove away and left me there." The rage that had been simmering in Garrett's chest since last night blazed into a bonfire. His hands clenched into fists on the table, and he had to take several deep breaths before he could trust himself to speak. "That man is going to answer for what he did," Garrett said, his voice low and dangerous. "No." Hannah reached across the table and touched his hand, her fingers small and cold against his. "Please, Garrett, I do not want you putting yourself in danger for me. Victor is gone and I am alive." "That is enough." "It is not enough," Garrett said fiercely. "He tried to murder you. He does not get to just walk away from that. And if you go after him and he kills you—" Hannah's eyes filled with tears. "Then where does that leave me? Alone again, knowing that someone else died because of me." The desperation in her voice made Garrett pause. She was right, in a way. Going after Victor Sutton in a rage would be foolish, would likely end with one or both of them dead. But the thought of that man walking free, possibly doing the same thing to another woman someday, made his blood boil. "All right," he said finally. "I will not go after him, not right now, but if he comes back, if he comes looking for you, I will not let him take you." "He will not come back," Hannah said with absolute certainty. "He thinks I am dead. And even if by some miracle he discovered I lived, he would never risk his reputation by admitting what he did. He will just move on to the next town, the next woman, and pretend I never existed." They finished breakfast in silence, and then Hannah insisted on cleaning up despite Garrett's protests. He watched her move around his small cabin, this stranger who had fallen into his life like snow from a dark sky, and wondered how everything had changed so completely in less than 24 hours. The days that followed fell into an unexpected rhythm. Hannah was weak at first, still recovering from her ordeal, and Garrett found himself hyper-aware of her every movement, ready to catch her if she stumbled or help her if she struggled. but she was stronger than she looked. And within 3 days, she was insisting on helping with the chores, cooking meals and mending his torn shirts and bringing a kind of order to his bachelor chaos that he had not realized he was missing. They talked as they worked, tentative at first and then with growing ease. Hannah told him about growing up in Santa Fe, about her father who had been a school teacher and had taught her to read and write and think for herself. She told him about the books she loved, the dreams she had once had of seeing the ocean, the small joys she had found in a life that had been harder than it should have been. Garrett told her about the war, about losing his entire family to fever while he was away fighting, about coming back to nothing and starting over in New Mexico, because he could not bear to stay in Missouri where every corner held ghosts. He told her about building the cabin, about the small herd of cattle he was slowly accumulating, about the plans he had for a future that had always seemed distant and vague until now. On the fourth night, as they sat by the fire after supper, Hannah said quietly, "I should leave soon. I am imposing on your hospitality." "You are not imposing," Garrett said immediately. "And where would you go?" "I do not know." She stared into the flames. "Roswell, perhaps. I could find work there, maybe as a cook or a laundress. I have to make my own way now, or you could stay here." The words were out before Garrett could stop them, and Hannah turned to look at him with wide eyes. "I cannot ask that of you," she said. "You are not asking. I am offering." Garrett leaned forward, trying to find the right words. "Hannah, I know we have only known each other a few days, but this cabin has felt more like a home since you have been here than it ever did before. You need a safe place, and I need—" He paused, surprised by the truth of what he was about to say. "I need someone to share this life with. It has been too quiet for too long." "People would talk," Hannah said, but her voice held more hope than objection. "A man and a woman living together unwed. It would cause scandal." Garrett's heart pounded so hard he was sure she must be able to hear it. "Then let them think we are married. When we go into town, I will introduce you as my wife. No one needs to know any different." "That would be a lie." "Would it?" Garrett met her eyes steadily. "I found you when you were lost. I brought you into my home. I am giving you my name and my protection. Those are the vows a husband makes to a wife, are they not?" Hannah stared at him for a long moment, and Garrett could see the war playing out behind her eyes. Fear and hope, caution and desire, all battling for dominance. "Why would you do this?" she whispered. "You do not know me. You do not owe me anything." "I do not know why," Garrett admitted. "I just know that when I saw you lying in that snow, something in me recognized something in you. And these past few days, having you here, talking with you and working beside you, Hannah, I have not felt this alive in years. Maybe it is too soon, maybe it is foolish, but I am not ready to let you walk away." Tears spilled down her cheeks, but she was smiling. "You are a good man, Garrett Brennan, better than I deserve. You deserve everything," he said fiercely. "You deserve a man who will cherish you, who will protect you, who will wake up every morning grateful that you are beside him. And I would like to try to be that man, if you will let me." Hannah crossed the small space between them and knelt in front of his chair. She took his weathered hands in hers and said, "Yes, yes, I will stay. I will be your wife in name and in truth if you will have me." Garrett pulled her up and into his arms, holding her close, feeling her heart beating against his chest. It felt right, this woman in his arms, this promise between them. It felt like coming home after a long journey, like finding something he had not even known he was searching for. That night, Garrett gave Hannah his bed again and made his bedroll by the fire, but he lay awake for hours, thinking about the future that had suddenly opened up before him. He had not lied when he said he did not fully understand why he had offered her his name and his home. But he knew, with a certainty that ran bone deep, that finding Hannah in the snow had been fate or providence or luck, and he was not going to question it. The next morning, they rode into Roswell together. Hannah wore one of Garrett's clean shirts tucked into a split riding skirt she had fashioned from an old blanket, and she sat behind him on Copper with her arms around his waist in a way that felt natural and right. The town was small, just a handful of buildings clustered along the Pecos River, but it had a general store and a blacksmith and a church, which was all they needed. Garrett helped Hannah down from the horse and offered her his arm. She took it, and they walked into the general store together. The proprietor, a round man named Henry Walsh, looked up from his counter and broke into a wide smile. "Garrett Brennan, as I live and breathe, have not seen you in town for near about a month. What brings you here? Need some supplies, Henry, and I wanted to introduce you to my wife." Garrett felt Hannah stiffen slightly at his side, but he kept his voice casual and easy. "This is Hannah." Henry's eyes widened, and then his smile grew even broader. "Wife? Well, I will be. When did this happen? We did not hear anything about a wedding." "We married quietly," Garrett said, the lie coming easier than he expected. "Hannah is from Santa Fe, and we decided not to make a fuss." "Well, congratulations to you both." Henry came around the counter to shake Garrett's hand and bow to Hannah. "Welcome to Roswell, Mrs. Brennan." "We are glad to have you, Mrs. Brennan." The name sent a thrill through Hannah that she tried to hide. Garrett felt her relax against his side, and pride surged through him at how well she was carrying off the deception. They spent an hour in the store, buying flour and sugar and coffee, and Hannah selected fabric for new dresses, protesting when Garrett insisted on buying more than she said she needed. Word spread quickly in the small town, and by the time they left the general store, several people had stopped them to offer congratulations and welcome Hannah to the community. On the ride back to the cabin, Hannah was quiet, and Garrett wondered if she was regretting her decision. But when they arrived home and he helped her down from Copper, she turned to him with shining eyes. "Thank you," she said simply. "Thank you for giving me a name and a place and a chance to start over." "You do not have to thank me," Garrett said, but Hannah shook her head. "Yes, I do. Not every man would have done what you did. Not every man would have seen me as worthy of saving." She reached up and touched his face, her palm warm against his cheek. "I promise you, Garrett, I will be the best wife I can be. I will make you glad you found me in that snow." Garrett caught her hand and pressed a kiss to her palm, feeling her tremble at the touch. "You already have." The weeks that followed were some of the happiest of Garrett's life. He taught Hannah how to ride properly, how to handle a rifle in case she ever needed to protect herself, how to read the weather and the land. She taught him how to laugh again, how to see beauty in small things, how to talk about his feelings instead of keeping everything locked inside. They slept separately still, Garrett insisting on giving her space and time, but the walls between them were slowly crumbling. They sat closer together by the fire each night. Their hands found excuses to touch more often. The looks they exchanged grew longer, more heated, charged with an attraction that neither could deny. One evening in late March, as spring was just beginning to touch the New Mexico landscape with green, Hannah was sitting at the table mending one of Garrett's shirts when she suddenly set down her needle and said, "I need to tell you something." Garrett looked up from the saddle he was repairing, his heart sinking. The serious tone in her voice made him think she was about to say she wanted to leave, that the past weeks had been a mistake. "I am falling in love with you," Hannah said, her voice shaking slightly but her eyes steady on his. "I did not mean to. I told myself it was too soon, that I was just grateful for your help, that I was confusing rescue with affection. But it is not gratitude I feel when I look at you, Garrett. It is love, real and true, and I needed you to know." Relief and joy exploded through Garrett's chest so powerfully he could barely breathe. He set aside the saddle and crossed to her in 3 long strides, pulling her up from her chair and into his arms. "I have been falling in love with you since the moment I found you," he said against her hair. "Maybe even before that, like my soul knew it was searching for you and just had not found you yet." Hannah pulled back enough to look up at him, and the happiness shining in her face made her beautiful beyond words. "Is it too soon? Is it foolish?" "I do not care if it is," Garrett said. "I do not care what anyone else thinks or says. All I care about is this, right here, right now. You and me and this life we are building together." He kissed her then, finally, after weeks of wanting and waiting. Her lips were soft and warm beneath his, and when she made a small sound of pleasure and wound her arms around his neck, Garrett felt like he could conquer the world. They broke apart breathing hard, and Hannah laughed, the sound pure and joyful. "I cannot believe this is real," she said. "2 months ago, I was lying in the snow waiting to die, and now I am standing in this cabin kissing the man I love and feeling like the luckiest woman alive." "Believe it," Garrett said, trailing kisses down her jaw to the sensitive spot below her ear that made her shiver. "This is real. You are real. We are real." That night, Hannah did not sleep in the bed alone, and Garrett did not make his bedroll by the fire. They came together with tenderness and passion, learning each other's bodies, murmuring words of love and promise in the darkness. And when dawn broke through the cabin windows, they lay tangled together beneath the quilts, content and complete in a way neither had ever been before. Spring turned to summer, and life settled into a beautiful routine. Garrett's small herd grew, and Hannah planted a garden that flourished under her careful attention. They went into Roswell once a month for supplies, and Hannah made friends with the other women in town, joining their sewing circle and attending church socials. No one questioned their marriage, and the lie became less and less a lie with every passing day. But in the back of Garrett's mind, there was always a shadow, a worry he could not quite shake. Victor Sutton was still out there somewhere, still believed he had murdered his wife and gotten away with it. And while Garrett trusted Hannah's conviction that the man would never come back, he could not help but prepare for the possibility. He taught Hannah to shoot, really shoot, until she could hit a target at 50 paces. He made sure the rifle was always loaded and within reach. He asked careful questions in town, trying to find out if anyone had seen a man matching Sutton's description, but no one had. In July, the summer heat was thick and oppressive when a stranger rode up to the cabin while Garrett was out checking on his cattle. Hannah was hanging laundry on the line behind the house when she heard the horse approaching, and something in the sound, in the deliberate slowness of the hoofbeats, made her blood run cold. She turned and saw him. Victor Sutton, looking older and meaner than she remembered, sitting on a dust-covered horse with a cruel smile splitting his face. "Well, well," Victor said, swinging down from his horse. "The wife who would not die, that is quite a trick, Hannah." Hannah did not run. She stood her ground, even though every instinct screamed at her to flee. "You need to leave, Victor. You have no claim on me anymore." "No claim," Victor laughed, the sound ugly and harsh. "You are my wife, Hannah, legally married in the eyes of God and man, and I have come to collect what is mine." "I am not yours," Hannah said, proud that her voice did not shake. "You left me to die. That severs any bond between us." Victor's face darkened with rage. "You think you can just run off and play house with some cowboy? I have been hearing stories about you, Hannah. About Garrett Brennan's new wife. Did you really think I would not find out?" He took a step toward her, and Hannah took a step back, calculating the distance to the house, to the rifle that waited inside. "Garrett will be back any minute. You should leave before he gets here." "That is what I am counting on," Victor said, and his hand dropped to the gun at his hip. "I am going to wait right here, and when your cowboy comes riding up, I am going to put a bullet in him. And then you and I are going to have a long talk about wifely obedience." Hannah felt fear close around her throat, but beneath it was a cold, hard anger. This man had nearly killed her once. He had thrown her away like garbage, left her to freeze, and now he had the audacity to come back and threaten the man she loved. "No," Hannah said, and her voice came out strong and clear. "You are not going to touch him. You are not going to hurt anyone ever again." She ran. Not away from Victor, but toward the house, toward the rifle. She heard him curse and come after her, heard his boots pounding on the hard earth. She made it through the door and grabbed the rifle from its place by the window, spinning around just as Victor burst through behind her. "Put that down," Victor snarled. "You do not have the backbone to use it." "You are wrong," Hannah said, and she raised the rifle to her shoulder, sighting down the barrel the way Garrett had taught her. "You were wrong about a lot of things, Victor. You were wrong to think I would just die quietly. You were wrong to think no one would care about me. And you are wrong to think I will let you destroy the life I have built." Victor's hand moved toward his gun, and Hannah did not hesitate. She pulled the trigger, the rifle's kick slamming into her shoulder, the sound deafening in the small cabin. Victor stumbled backward, clutching his leg, blood seeping between his fingers. "You shot me," he gasped, disbelief and pain warring on his face. "You actually shot me." "And I will shoot you again if you do not leave," Hannah said, already reloading with steady hands. "This time I will not aim for your leg." Victor stared at her, and Hannah saw the moment he realized she meant every word. The cruel arrogance drained out of his face, replaced by something that looked almost like fear. "This is not over," he said, limping backward toward his horse. "You are still my wife. I could have you arrested for this." "Then do it," Hannah said coldly. "Go to the sheriff and explain how you came back for the wife you tried to murder. Explain how you threatened her and the man who saved her. See how much sympathy you get." Victor's mouth worked soundlessly for a moment, and then he turned and half fell onto his horse. He wheeled the animal around and galloped away, leaving a trail of blood drops in the dust. Hannah stood in the doorway, the rifle still in her hands, and watched until he disappeared over the rise. Then her legs gave out and she sank down onto the threshold, shaking so hard her teeth rattled. That was how Garrett found her 10 minutes later, still sitting there with the rifle across her knees and tears streaming down her face. He was off copper in an instant, gathering her into his arms, demanding to know what happened. Hannah told him everything, her words tumbling out in a rush. She told him about Victor, about the shooting, about the blood and the threats and the terrible relief she felt knowing it was finally over. "You shot him," Garrett said, and there was something like awe in his voice. "Hannah, you actually shot him." "I did not know what else to do," Hannah said, and a sob broke through. "He was going to kill you, Garrett. He said he was going to wait and kill you when you came home. I could not let that happen. I could not lose you." Garrett held her tighter, pressing kisses to her hair, her forehead, her tear-stained cheeks. "You are incredible. You are the strongest, bravest woman I have ever known, and I am so proud of you I could burst." "I was so scared," Hannah whispered. "I know. But you did not let that fear stop you. You protected yourself and you protected me, and that is what matters." They went into town the next day to report what had happened to Sheriff David Morrison, a grizzled old lawman who had seen everything twice. He listened to their story, examined the blood on the cabin floor and the trail leading away, and nodded slowly. "That Sutton fellow came through here 2 days back," Morrison said. "Asking questions about a woman matching your description, Hannah. I did not like the look of him, so I told him I had not seen anyone like that. Guess he did not believe me." "What happens now?" Garrett asked. Morrison shrugged. Far as I am concerned, you were defending your home and your husband. That is your right. If Sutton shows his face in Roswell, I will arrest him for trespassing and threatening behavior. But my guess is he will ride far away and stay gone. Men like that are cowards at heart. Relief flooded through Hannah so powerfully she swayed on her feet. Garrett steadied her with an arm around her waist. "Thank you, Sheriff," Garrett said. "No need for thanks. Just doing my job." Morrison's weathered face creased in something that might have been a smile. "You two take care of each other now." On the ride home, Hannah was quiet and Garrett did not push her to talk. Some things needed time to process, needed silence to settle into the soul. It was not until they were back at the cabin, sitting together on the porch steps watching the sun set, that Hannah finally spoke. "I really am your wife now, am I not?" she said softly. "Not just in pretend, but in truth. I fought for you. I would have killed for you if I had to." "You have been my wife in truth since the day I found you," Garrett said. "But yes, I suppose you sealed it in blood today." "Which is very dramatic of you." Hannah laughed, surprised by the sound. Trust Garrett to find humor even in this. "I love you," she said. "I love you so much it frightens me sometimes." "I love you too," Garrett said, pulling her close. "And I promise you, Hannah, no one is ever going to hurt you again. We are going to have a good life together, a real life, with children and grandchildren and 50 years of stories to tell." 50 years. Hannah looked up at him with raised eyebrows. "At least," Garrett said firmly. "I plan on keeping you around for a very long time." True to his word, Victor Sutton never returned. They heard through the grapevine that he had left New Mexico entirely, heading west toward California, and Hannah felt the last knot of fear in her chest finally loosen and dissolve. He was gone, truly gone, and she was free. In the fall, Hannah discovered she was pregnant. The realization came slowly, a series of small changes that added up to an unmistakable truth. When she finally told Garrett, he picked her up and spun her around, whooping with joy, and then immediately set her back down and apologized for possibly jostling the baby. "Garrett," Hannah said, laughing, "I am barely pregnant. The baby is fine." "Our baby," Garrett said wonderingly, placing a hand on her still flat stomach. "We are going to have a baby." They spent the winter preparing, Garrett building a cradle with his own hands while Hannah sewed tiny clothes and blankets. The women from the church brought gifts and advice, and Hannah found herself part of a community in a way she had never been before. The baby came in early April, a spring baby just like his mother wanted. The labor was long and hard, but when Garrett finally held his son in his arms, tears streaming down his face, he knew that every moment of worry had been worth it. "What should we name him?" Hannah asked, exhausted but glowing with happiness. Garrett looked down at the tiny, perfect face of his son and said, "Thomas, after my father, Thomas Brennan." "Thomas," Hannah repeated, testing the name. "Yes, that is perfect." Watching Garrett with their son, seeing the gentleness and love in every touch, every word, Hannah felt a contentment so deep it bordered on disbelief. This was her life now. This man, this child, this home. All of it was hers, solid and real and earned through pain and courage and love. As Thomas grew from infant to toddler, their lives expanded to accommodate him. The cabin that had once seemed plenty big enough for two felt suddenly cramped, and Garrett spent the summer of 1885 building an addition, a second bedroom and a proper dining room where they could entertain guests. Hannah's garden grew larger each year, producing enough vegetables to feed their family and sell the surplus in town. The cattle business prospered too. Garrett's small herd became a respectable herd, and he hired 2 ranch hands to help with the work. The Brennan Ranch was becoming known throughout the territory as a place of honest dealing and quality stock. On their third anniversary, not the anniversary of their fake marriage, but the anniversary of the night they had first admitted their love, Garrett surprised Hannah by taking her into Roswell for a special purpose. He led her to the small church where Father Miguel served the Catholic community. "I want to marry you properly," Garrett said, holding both her hands in his. "I want vows spoken in a church with God as our witness. I want it to be official in every possible way." Hannah's eyes filled with tears. "We are already married, you know that. I know. But I want to give you this anyway. I want you to have a wedding to remember, not a lie told in a general store, but a true ceremony with all our friends there to see it." So they married again, this time in truth before Father Miguel and half the town. Hannah wore a dress of blue silk that Garrett had ordered all the way from Santa Fe, and he wore a new suit that made him look uncomfortably stiff, but devastatingly handsome. Thomas, now 2 years old, carried the rings down the aisle and promptly dropped them, causing general laughter and making the ceremony somehow even more perfect for being imperfect. When Father Miguel pronounced them husband and wife, Garrett kissed Hannah with such passion that several of the older ladies fanned themselves and pretended to be scandalized. But Hannah could see the softness in their eyes, the approval. Everyone loved a good love story, and theirs was a story worth loving. Life continued its steady, beautiful rhythm. Hannah gave birth to a daughter in 1886, a tiny girl with Garrett's dark hair and Hannah's green eyes, whom they named Lily. Then came another son in 1888, Samuel, who was calm and thoughtful from birth. Their family grew, the cabin expanded further, and the ranch prospered beyond Garrett's wildest dreams. But for all their material success, what mattered most to both Garrett and Hannah was the love that continued to grow between them. Even after years of marriage, Garrett still looked at Hannah like she was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. Even after 3 children and countless sleepless nights, Hannah still felt her heart skip when Garrett walked into a room. They had arguments, of course, disagreements about money or discipline, or whose turn it was to fix the leaky roof. But they always came back together, always remembered that they had been forged in hardship and nearly broken before they found each other. That knowledge made them gentle with one another, made them quick to apologize and slow to anger. One evening in the summer of 1890, 7 years after Garrett had found Hannah in the snow, they sat on their porch watching their children play in the yard. Thomas was 9 now, tall and gangly, helping his father with the cattle and showing signs of the man he would become. Lily was 4, all energy and laughter, chasing butterflies with single-minded determination. Samuel, 2 years old, sat in the dirt making roads for his wooden horses. "You ever think about that day?" Hannah asked quietly. "The day you found me?" "Every day," Garrett said, reaching for her hand. "I think about how close I came to taking a different route, to missing you entirely. I think about how different my life would be without you." "Empty," Hannah said. "That is how mine would be, empty and cold and meaningless." Garrett lifted her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles. "You saved me just as much as I saved you, you know. I was just existing before you came along, working and sleeping and going through the motions. You taught me how to live again." Hannah leaned her head on his shoulder, and they sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. This was happiness, she thought. Not the dramatic, breathless kind that came in the early days of falling in love, but the deep, steady kind that came from years of choosing each other every single day. "Mama, Papa," Lily came running up the porch steps, her face flushed and excited. "Thomas says he saw a shooting star." "Can we stay up and watch for more?" Garrett looked at Hannah, and she saw her own thoughts reflected in his eyes. Why not? Life was short, and these moments with their children were precious and fleeting. "Yes," Hannah said, and Lily squealed with delight. "We can all watch for shooting stars tonight." So they spread blankets in the yard, all 5 of them lying on their backs staring up at the vast New Mexico sky. Thomas pointed out constellations, making up stories about them that had Samuel wide-eyed with wonder. Lily sang a little song she had learned at church, and Garrett and Hannah held hands between them, their fingers intertwined, their hearts full to bursting. When the first shooting star streaked across the sky, everyone gasped and made a wish. Hannah did not need to think about what to wish for. She had everything she could ever want right here, right now. But she wished anyway, wished for this feeling to last forever, for her family to always be safe and happy and together. The years continued to pass, bringing their share of joys and sorrows. There were hard winters when the cattle suffered and money grew tight. There were illnesses that had Hannah sitting up all night with a fevered child, praying for dawn to break. There was the year the barn burned down and had to be rebuilt from scratch. There was the year Garrett broke his leg and had to let Hannah run the ranch for 3 months, an experience that surprised them both by showing just how capable she was. But through it all, they had each other. They had the foundation they had built in those early days, when Hannah was still learning to trust again, and Garrett was still learning to open his heart. That foundation held firm through every storm, every challenge, every test that life threw at them. Thomas grew up and fell in love with a girl from Roswell, a sweet-tempered young woman named Caroline, who made him laugh and reminded Hannah of herself at that age. They married in 1897, when Thomas was 24, and built a house on the far edge of the Brennan property, close enough to help with the ranch but far enough to have their own space. Lily proved to have a gift for horses, gentling even the most stubborn animals with patience and skill. She married a horse trader named William Porter in 1902, and they started their own business breeding and training horses for ranchers throughout the territory. Samuel, their youngest, surprised everyone by becoming a teacher. He went away to school and came back with a degree and a passion for education that reminded Hannah so much of her own father, she sometimes had to blink back tears. He opened a school in Roswell and became beloved by his students, known for his kindness and his ability to make even the most difficult subjects interesting. By 1905, Garrett and Hannah were grandparents 5 times over, with more grandchildren surely on the way. Their hair had gone gray, their bodies had slowed down, but the love between them burned as bright as ever one day in early February, 22 years after Garrett had found Hannah in the snow. They rode out together to the place where it had happened. The land looked different now, more settled, with fences and roads where there had once been only wilderness. But the spot was still there, still recognizable if you knew where to look. Garrett helped Hannah down from her horse, and they stood together looking at the ground where she had almost died. "I was so scared," Hannah said softly. "I remember thinking this was how it ended, alone and cold and forgotten. I remember feeling angry that my life had amounted to so little." "And now?" Garrett asked. Hannah turned to look at him, this man who had saved her in every way a person could be saved. His face was lined with age and weather, his hands gnarled from decades of hard work. But his eyes were the same as they had been that first day, kind and fierce and full of love. "Now I know that my life has amounted to everything," Hannah said. 3 children who are good people making their own way in the world, 5 grandchildren who will grow up knowing they are loved. A home built with my own hands alongside yours, a marriage that has weathered every storm and come out stronger. That is more than most people get, Garrett. That is more than I ever dreamed possible." Garrett pulled her close, and they stood there in the cold February air, holding each other the way they had held each other countless times before. I would do it all again, Garrett said into her hair. Every moment, every choice, every hardship. If I knew it would lead me here to you, to this life we have built together, I would do it all again in a heartbeat. So would I, Hannah whispered. Even the bad parts, even Victor and the cold and the fear, because all of it led me to you and you were worth every moment of suffering. They rode back home together as the sun began to set, their horses walking side by side, their hands occasionally reaching out to touch. The cabin came into view, no longer a small bachelor's dwelling but a sprawling ranch house that had been added onto and improved year after year. Smoke rose from the chimney and they could see lights in the windows, warm and welcoming. This was home. This was family. This was love that,